Hyperviolent is a new indie first-person shooter that is hoping to cash in on the popularity of the retro shooter genre. I personally love this resurgence in new first-person shooters that both look older and play more like from the classic era. There's something special about this time period, and it is a perfect opportunity for indie devs to step in and bring us those experiences. Hyperviolent is billed as a fast-paced, violent shooter, but I actually found most of the demo to be a bit slower, with engaging bursts of action. This type of approach let the tension build up enough, and the frequent action meant you were always engaged. I found some areas as well that hopefully the developers can iron out before their release, but overall this is a promising and fun title. The bulk of the gameplay centers around the shooting. When it comes to the action, it's enjoyably violent and mostly lives up to the name of the game. The sound effects for the guns are decent, with the impact doing most of the heavy lifting. Enemies will burst open or create piles of mush as you take them out. Shooting was always good and enjoyable. What I liked about Hyperviolent is how you could equip a nice combination of weapons in both of your hands. You could not dual wield the heavier weapons like the shotgun, but many of the smaller one-handed weapons could be dual wielded with different combinations decided by the player. This is where some of the player expression comes into play. You can opt to use two of the same weapon, or you can have a melee weapon in one hand with a gun in the other, or you can have a combination of two different guns. The zombie-like enemies go down quickly with the melee hits, making it a good option to keep one of the melee weapons equipped as you are exploring. The demo had a few different weapons for you to play around with, from a stun baton, axe, different pistols, shotgun, and more. The game is at its strongest when you're shooting at something. Being that this is molded in the style of an old school shooter, there were a decent amount of secret areas to find where you could get additional weapons or supplies. The atmosphere is pretty good from the creepy enemies you fight along with the lighting. While Hyperviolent does not feel like a horror game, it has some space horror influences seen in its visual design. It helps to create this constant state of tension. There was one small area that I really did enjoy and did not expect in a title like this. So I came across a terminal that required a passcode for me to enter. I searched all over and could not find anything for the code, until it hit me that I picked up a data log with the same username as the one on the terminal, and I thought maybe there is a code within this data log for the computer. The log mentioned a name and I tried using that as the passcode, and it worked and allowed me access. This was a really satisfying moment that allowed for some problem solving to gain access to that terminal. I hope the main game contains more stuff like this. It is less of the game holding you by your hand and allowing the player to actually get a bit creative within this space. And when it comes to the objectives, it's rather simple. Kill anything that moves and find the next colored key to open up the next area. It is a simple formula that worked back then and still works now. Like I mentioned before, I found the general action and gameplay to not be as fast-paced as the game's Steam page advertises. And I don't mean this as a flaw. Hyperviolent has plenty of moments that allows for the tension to build, a bit before you start shooting something new. There is frequent action, but it felt like these quick explosions of intensity mixed in with some time to allow the game to build back up to another action set piece. There is frequent action, but it felt like these quick explosions of intensity mixed in with some time to allow the game to come back down to get ready for the next piece of action. I spent about 2 hours with the demo build, and overall I really enjoyed what I had played and saw the potential here. While this current version is an early build, I did identify a few areas that could help to potentially improve the experience. For one, the demo did not allow me to change my sensitivity, and there is a lack of options for this game as well. For example, there's no graphical options for the demo. Something that I found really odd was how there was no way for me to reload my weapons whenever I wanted to. I could only do this when I was completely out of ammo in my magazine. magazine. I feel like this is probably an oversight being that this is a very early build. I did find it annoying that you had to manually hit a button each time you wanted to pick something up. This meant that every time I wanted ammo, I had to hit a button. I can understand needing to hit a button to pick up a gun, but not for the ammo. You are always going to want to pick up the ammo that you come across. I had a few instances of enemies being really dumb, either not engaging with me or just getting stuck. I had one time where an enemy refused to go around a corner to attack me, and on another occasion I had two enemies get stuck in a hallway as they tried to move towards me. I did like how there was a bunch of blood on screen every time you take damage, even causing your character to wipe his face to remove it. It's a nice touch, but in some of the more chaotic fights, the screen can be almost too red that it makes it really hard to see where any of your enemies are and react appropriately. My main issue with the demo was coming from some of the confusing design choices in some areas. For example, I came to a point where there was a fire blocking my path. I thought this was the game trying to tell me to not go this way or I will die, but I still could not figure out how to proceed. I searched everywhere and I could not find a way to go forward. Finally, I decided to try and go through the middle of the fire and see what would happen. I ended up not taking any damage and was able to continue with the demo. If you go through the middle, you do not take any damage, but if you are a little too far to the right or left, you will take damage. This was really confusing and frustrating to determine that this was the correct path to take. If the game wanted me to go through the fire, I think the flames really should have only been on the wall, indicating that the floor was fine to walk over. There is even a spot later on where there's fire around a control panel, and it looked like a control panel that I'd used before. I tried to do something with the panel, but I only ended up taking damage. I think many of these things are all doable to fix for the final release. Hyperviolent is a promising retro-style first-person shooter. When it comes to the action, it's generally really good. You need to be a bit cautious while in fights and not blindly walking into combat. At the same time, there is some appreciated exploration from finding hidden areas and supplies, along with a bit of problem-solving providing more player achievement. I did identify some areas that if improved I think will only help the final game. Outside of the demo, the main game is really interesting in what it is offering. The Steam page cites the game as having RPG-like mechanics with upgrading weapons and NPC interaction. Hyperviolent is also planning to have competitive multiplayer along with a 4-player co-op mode. Old school multiplayer in this setting sounds like a nice move, and I hope that there's some form of bots as well. The co-op is really what has my interest. Hyperviolent is aimed to come with a good amount of content from a single-player mode, co-op, and multiplayer. This is a very promising first-person shooter that you should keep your eye out for in 2022. And thank you very much for watching.